drove by the soccer fields right over here on Viking. And it took every ounce of my body to not just like stop the car and just run out there and start playing with the kids over there. If you know much about me, you'll know pretty quick that I love playing soccer. I grew up playing soccer all the time. It was one of the passions that I have. If you ever catch me talking about some of my soccer stories, you'll see my eyes usually light up and I just get really passionate about it. And it's okay to tell me to stop, because once you get started, I'll talk for hours a lot of times. But I really love soccer, and growing up, there was just something about playing soccer that just kind of hooked me. You know, there was something about, you could give me a ball in my hands, and I just would not know what to do with it. You know, I would look at, actually, the first ball I ever had was a basketball, and because my parents, they didn't have enough money to afford a soccer ball, and so I kicked around a basketball for years, because that's just what I know to do. I know to kick around balls, and we lived across from the street, which was great because I could go out all summer and I would just kick around the ball out there nonstop, just played with it. If you ask me to run a mile, I could maybe run 10 feet. If you put a soccer ball in front of me, I'll run miles chasing that thing, just without even being asked. And I loved playing out at this across the street from our house, and it was just worked out great for the summer. But I grew up in Iowa, and in Iowa, obviously there's long winters, somewhat like the winter we had this winter, in which I had to have a plan B of how I was going to kick around a ball now. And growing up, we had this extremely tiny house, probably no more than 900 square feet. And I didn't quite understand as a little kid, you probably shouldn't kick around a ball inside. But I didn't really have a whole lot of other options, so I just thought, well, this is what I have to do. My parents noticed pretty quickly that I was having fun kicking around the ball in this small house, and obviously, you know, they told me to stop, but I wasn't always the best kid, so I didn't always just stop on the first time. And so then my parents said, fine, if you want to kick around the ball, go for it. But if you break anything, you will have to pay for it. And so I can continue to kick around the ball. We had this really small entryway, and I figured if I kick the ball against our front door in this small entryway, the chances that the ball is going to get past me and I'm not able to stop it is pretty slim. So I continued to kick the ball there over and over. Every now and then, though, the ball would get past me. There was really close calls as the ball did fly past me, but I was really, relieved when it didn't hit anything. But one day, I was kicking the ball. I was kicking it rather hard, and I kicked one, and it sailed right past me, past my shoulder. And it was one of those moments where you see a train wreck happening kind of in slow motion, and you can't really do anything but just watch as it unfolds. And I watched as the ball flew right past my shoulder, across the living room, into one of our shelves that we had. And I saw that it hit something pretty hard, it flew off, and you just heard it break. I was like, okay, maybe it's something that wasn't worth anything. So I walk up to it, and I look at it, and I'm like, uh-oh. It's like the worst possible thing I could have broke. I actually have a picture to show you what it was. My sister had been taking ceramic classes, and she had really got into these angels, these ceramic angels that she loved to paint and make, and she was pretty good at it. And I'd actually hit one of her first angels that she had made, and it had fallen down and broken. And I think at first I tried to piece it together, see if there's any way I could glue it together, and that wasn't really working. So I just figured I was just going to have to wait until someone finally figured it out, that I broke it. My parents found out pretty quick. My sister came home, and my parents, there's a lot of things about my parents. One thing my parents never did is they never gave empty threats. So I knew I was going to have to pay for this. And so I'm thinking, my parents are probably just going to say, okay, Josiah, you owe your sister $15, $20. I pay the $15, $20, and it's over. Instead, my parents went to my sister, and they said, Angela, Josiah broke your angel. You need to come up with a price that you would sell that if you were selling that to someone else, and Josiah will have to pay for it. Now, as you can imagine, I was only 8 or 9 at the time. My sister was 10 years older than me. her negotiating tactics were much farther along than mine at that point. And so we had a meeting with my parents, and my sister came. She came, I don't know if she had a list of paper or whatever, but it was almost as if she, had listed off all these different things, and she began to talk about, the cost that the angel mold that she bought in the first place cost her. She started to factor in the cost of the paint, the cost that she had to pay to use the kiln to fire it up. Then she started getting a little more advanced with her tactics. She started talking about her valuable time, how much she thought she should make per hour while painting this and creating this piece, okay? And then to top it all off was, all the sentimental value. I swear she got a little teary. She talked about it being one of her first pieces. And I was just like, come on. And then she came up with the most convenient number for her of $100. Now, $100 today to me isn't that massive amount. I don't think I'd ever spent $100 on anything in my life. To me, that was like 5 awesome Lego sets I could buy, And I was like, what? $100? Are you kidding me? And you know what? My parents didn't change anything. I had to pay my sister that $100. And you know what? My sister taught me a really important lesson about value that day. That people value things much differently. And if you break something, you're just going to have to pay what that person has valued. Over the past couple of years, I like to watch this TV show. There's this TV show on the History Channel. My tastes have changed as I've gotten older. I probably would have watched the History Channel, 3 years ago. But there's this TV show. It's called Pawn Stars. Maybe you've seen it. It takes place in a pawn shop. If you've never seen this, a lot of people liken it to Antique Roadshow, which is another show that's a lot like it. And it's this pawn store that you can actually go to in Las Vegas. And the owners of it it's a family-owned business. The main guy that kind of owns it is his name is Rick. And the TV show just kind of really captures my attention because there's always kind of this friction behind what people value things. And on that show, that friction pops up quite often. And I think it's one of the reasons why I've really learned to love to watch it. People will bring in what they find valuable to them, and they're looking to make some quick cash. So they bring it into the pawn shop, and at the pawn shop, they begin kind of negotiating, and then they'll try to sell it to them. And I've noticed, over the time that I've watched this, there's a real strong formula in the way that this happens every time. The people will bring in the piece, and the first thing they'll do is they spend a lot of time looking at the condition of the piece, of what the person's trying to sell. And they'll always look at the condition first, and then they'll establish the condition, and then they always establish the value of the piece. And when they're looking at establishing the condition of the piece, they're always looking at how rare is this piece, how old is this piece, how well kept has it been over the years, is it fully functional, is it fake or is it real? A lot of people will bring in something that isn't even actually real, it's actually fake. A lot of times even the resources, what kind of resources is this created out of? And this is something that I think we do on a typical basis. A lot of times, even when we go to the grocery store, like if I want to buy a piece of fruit, I evaluate things in a lot of the same ways. I look at it, what is the condition? What is the value that they want me to pay? If they don't match, we don't have a deal. But if they match, I'm willing to pay that. And I'm always looking at what is the best piece of fruit, that I can get for that value, because I want to make a good deal. And it's something that we don't even think about too much. This whole kind of concept about value. And currently we've been going through this sermon series titled Great One-Liners. And while we've been going through this sermon series, we've been kind of taking a look at verses that a lot of us probably have read or seen, maybe hundreds of times. Some of us maybe have already memorized it. But we're going through these, we've been trying to take a different look at them. And also, we've been encouraging people to memorize these and really internalize them as well. And tonight we're going to look at a verse, and our first verse is in Romans, actually 2 verses we'll be looking at. Our first verse is found in Romans 5:8, which says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Now, growing up, both my parents were huge examples for me in my faith, and especially my mom. When it came to verse memorization, man, I hated memorizing verses. I don't know about you, but there's something that's just really hard for me to memorize verses. And I remember my mom was teaching me about memorizing verses for one of the first times. And she said something to me back then that stuck with me, that you never know when you say something to your kid, at any time, you just kind of stick with them. But she said something that kind of stuck with me. She said, "Josiah, it's not enough that you just memorize the words, because anybody can memorize the words in the verse. But as you're memorizing the words of the verse, can you say that you full-heartedly believe in what the verse is saying?" And she started to tell me a story about when she was in college. And when she was in college, she was memorizing several verses. I think she had a list of verses she was trying to get through. And she had decided, instead of just getting through this list of verses as fast as I can, instead I'm going to memorize them one at a time, and I will only move on to the next verse when I can say that I full-heartedly believe in everything that verse entails. And I don't know if it was this verse in particular, but it was a verse that read a lot like Romans 5:8, where she began to look at it. She started to read, and she, at the beginning it says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this." Well, I can say I believe in God. I can believe that he has demonstrated his love, that he's alive and active in the world and shows his love in a tangible way for us. And then she got to this part where it says, "While we were still sinners." And she wasn't really expecting this, but she got stopped right there. And she got to the part that described her condition as being a sinner. And she kind of had this pushback in her heart that kind of was like, I don't know if I can say that I truly believe that I am a sinner, like that I fit in that category. A lot of us like to think that we're good people. I work with middle schoolers. I can't tell you how many times a parent has dropped out their kid and just be like, just make them a good person. We want to be good people. That's how we want to describe our condition. And that's what we want. And some of us, if we're honest, some of us truly believe that's the condition that we're in. And that's fine. If that's what you're in, I would challenge you to think about that. And the Bible says our righteousness are like dirty rags to God. And it's not even about our best day. If you put me in the right situation at the right time, I'd probably come off as a pretty good person. But you put me in a bad position, like if the Avalanche lost last night, you would know I'm not a good person deep down. My condition is much more like a sinner. I started reading this verse, and I started taking my mom's advice, and I started reading it like she would. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. No problem there. But I got to this section too. This part that says, "While we were still sinners," or you could even put, "while I was still a sinner," in there in place of that. And I stopped there. And I thought about it for a second. I was having a hard time with it too. But I started thinking about, why my mom stopped at that part, and then I started thinking why I stopped there. And I came to a different conclusion. I didn't stop there because I was having a hard time grasping that I'm a sinner. You just heard a story of me as a kid. I didn't listen well to my parents. Really, in all honesty, I know that the condition that I am is a sinner. The thoughts that I have when no one else can hear what's going on in my brain, the struggles that I have. I struggle to live according to God's ways. It's hard. I have no struggle in my mind knowing that describes me. But there was a different reason why I stopped there. And because the reason why I stopped there is because I know that if that is my condition, then there's really a second question that follows that up instantly in my head. If my condition is that I'm a sinner, then what value am I? If that's the label I have, and that's the condition I have, what value, if any, do I hold? I began to think about this, and I began to think about, just everything, that entails the adult life, and I kind of came to a conclusion, and I'm kind of convinced that much of my adult life has become centered around trying to raise my perception, at least people's perception, of my condition so that I will feel more valuable. I even thought about, simple things like Facebook. I get on Facebook, and Facebook's a really interesting thing in itself, in which I control every little thing that I put on there. And I'm not going to choose to show a condition that is true to my heart. I'm going to be very picky if I'm going to put a picture up there. I sure hope that picture is going to be one that shows me in a good condition and a good light. If I even catch myself, if I'm typing a little Facebook update status thing, sometimes it takes me like 20 minutes to post one. Because I'm thinking the whole time, how is this showing my condition? Is this raising people's perception of my condition to being like, oh, Josiah's funny, or Josiah's a good guy, or Josiah put a verse up there, he's really spiritual. Is that the reason why I'm doing it? Because I'm trying to raise my condition around others? Because I really feel as if that will raise my value. Something I struggle with at work. I want others to see me as competent, successful, busy, and spiritual. People ask me all the time, how are you doing today? I'm always going to say, good or great, because I want my condition to look as good as possible, even though my condition may be terrible at that time. Even people ask me, about work, I often feel this unnecessary need to talk about how busy I am, because our culture values busyness. And so sometimes I will talk about how busy I am when I'm really actually not necessarily that busy. I want people to see the work I do, and I want to feel valuable to them for it. But no matter how hard I try, I never quite find the value I desire to feel from my work. Maybe you feel a similar way. For those of you who are here tonight, and you may kind of be in the same boat that I am, where you feel like your condition is what determines your value, then I just have one question to ask you. How is that working out for you? As you raise your condition, do you feel more valuable? Is there a cause and effect there? As the responsibilities on your shoulders at work get higher, or your position gets higher at your job, do you feel more valuable? How about the more stuff you buy, the fancier your clothes, the nicer your house or car? Does that give you more value? How about the more people you can call friends? Or maybe how well known the people you know are? Does that make you feel more valuable? Does coming to church regularly and showing up and volunteering and looking spiritual, does that make you feel more valuable? See, no matter how much we change the condition, or we try to change the condition on our lives on the outside, the condition on the inside stays the same. And I don't know about you, but I feel powerless to change that. And I don't think a lifetime of working on my condition will ever bring me close to the value I wish I could attain. And back to Romans 5:8. If you're like my mom and you stop where it says, while we were still sinners, and you stop there because you truly feel your condition is good, which the Bible doesn't describe our condition as great. It doesn't describe our condition as good. It doesn't even describe it as fair. It describes it as being broken, and almost to a place where it's offensive to God. If you're having a problem and you can't say, like, I feel like I'm a good person, I would actually encourage you to go no further in the verse. But if you find yourself in my boat and you have a hard time saying, I'm a sinner, because you feel like if you say that's your condition, what is your value? I encourage you to continue quickly. See, most of the time when you're watching Pawn Stars, most of the time that is spent in the negotiation actually is spent looking at the condition. And I think that's part of how it's a show. You know, they want to show how interesting this piece is in history, or how cool it is, or how much, you know, different things that they can talk about. They spend a lot of time in looking at the condition, and very, very small amount of time when it talks about the value of the piece. And it's really interesting because when it switches between this part where they're discussing the condition and then they switch over to talking about the value, you can always see that the person who's trying to sell the piece does not make the transition as seamlessly as the guy that's trying to buy the piece. The guy's name is Rick. And he's very good at what he does. I mean, he has to be. You don't stay in business at a pawn shop unless you know what you're doing when it comes to this. But you can see kind of how his mind switches. See, he'll have people that will bring in things that the condition of them are amazing. You know, maybe it's a guitar that, you know, Jimi Hendrix played and signed, and it was on the album. And he gets caught up in the condition too, and you know, they're all kind of in awe. But when he switches over to talking about the value, he makes a really big switch in his head that the other person doesn't. And he understands something about value that I think we don't inherently understand. See, the people trying to sell it, they think, well, the condition is what determines the value. That's what that person's thinking. So we just talked about how great the condition is. So the value is going to be astronomical sometimes. Some of them are thinking like millions of dollars in their head. But his brain switches to a different question. And really it's the question that determines value. And the question is, how much is someone willing to pay? It's a much different question than just looking at the condition isolated, but when they get to the idea of value, he switches because he knows he can only pay as much, a little bit less, than what someone else is willing to pay. And so everything about the condition goes out the window. You see people bring in these cars in which, you know, they spent $10,000 on the rims, and they put $20,000 into the engine, and he's like, well, your car as a whole, I think someone would only pay $20,000 for it. And they're still stuck on the condition. And I think that happens for us a lot. I think we get stuck on the condition. But as we read Romans 5:8 and we go past that part that says, why we were still sinners, we read something else. Christ died for us. And if we're thinking about condition and we're thinking about value, our value is not in that we're a sinner. Our value is in what somebody paid for us. And the price was steep. It was a big price tag. That is where we find our value. Not in that we're sinners. It's important for you to understand you are a sinner, but you got to move past that and understand the price Christ paid gives you immense value. I mean, think about it. God was willing to send his son. If you have a son or a daughter, maybe you can understand a little bit about value of what a child means to you. And then to send him on earth to where he would be killed in a way in which he'd be ridiculed, mocked, tortured, shamed. The price for us was steep. So we have to ask the question, is there anything out there in this world that can give us more value than the price that Christ paid for us on the cross? There's no amount you can raise your condition to come close to the price that Christ paid. So are we going to look to raise our value in the world we live in? Or are we going to cling to the value that God has already displayed for us? While Romans 5:8, I think it exposes a lie that many of us believe, that our condition is what determines our value. 1 John 4:10 exposes another common lie I think we're tricked into believing. 1 John 4:10 says this, "This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin." So I think it could be really common to think that God only values us to the degree we're willing to value him. It has nothing to do about us. It doesn't have to do with our condition, and it doesn't even have to do with how much we value him. He values us apart from all of those things. There's no need for you to try to love him more so that he will love you more. He's already displayed. He's already paid full price. There's nothing you can do to raise that. I want to read a story for you that I heard not too long ago that I just thought was a really great story. I'm going to just read it off here. There's an old story that has been told for many years on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. The story is centered around an old and unusual custom that was observed in one of their villages. In order for a daughter's hand to be given in marriage, cows were first to be paid to the father by the prospective husband. The typical amount of cows for a daughter was 3. Every now and then, a daughter well above the average beauty of others could fetch a total of 4 cows. And there was even a legend that at one time such an extraordinary daughter fetched the unthinkable sum of 5 cows. During this time, there was a poor farmer with 2 daughters who lived out in the country by a small village. He was barely able to provide for his family. He knew that his future financial stability largely depended on how many cows he would get in exchange for his 2 daughters' hands in marriage. Now the man's younger daughter was by far the fairer of the 2. As such, she was the apple of her father's eye and enjoyed high status in the family. The man knew he would be able to fetch at least 3 cows for her and would often dream possibility of 4. The older daughter was not as pretty as her younger sister, and she lived constantly in her sister's shadow. To her were assigned the menial tasks of feeding and caring for the farm animals, the cooking and cleaning of the house. The sun had left tracks on her weathered face, and in her hands and feet she wore the reminders of hard manual labor. She walked with her shoulders hunched and her head ducked, as if she was trying to hide behind herself. Her cheeks had no color, and her hair was a tangled mop half over her face. The father knew that her lack of beauty, that the most he could possibly dream of getting for her hand in marriage would be 2 cows. But realistically, he was prepared for her to only fetch 1 cow, and in the worst case scenario, if he was unable to get any cows for her, he would give her away for none other than just to offset the financial burden of keeping her in his home. One day a stranger appeared in the village. He was a man of means, for he stayed at the best inn, and every night he held lavish parties as he entertained his friends. As the days passed in the village, he made it known that he was seeking a woman to marry. He sent messengers to spread the news throughout the countryside that he was throwing a feast for all the people. He invited everyone to come, rich or poor, and he announced that he would be selecting a woman to be his bride that night. Upon hearing the news, the poor farmer was filled with joy. Here at last was an opportunity for which he had been waiting. He knew that his youngest daughter could attract the rich man's eye, and he began to dream of the likelihood of fetching 4 or even 5 cows. On the night of the feast, the father brought along his younger daughter. Never had she looked as beautiful as she did that night. At long last, it was the father's turn to present his daughter before the rich man. He said, Have you ever seen such a fair woman as this one?" he exclaimed with joy. "Why, she is the envy of every woman in this village. Just look at her hands, her feet, and her face. She is worthy of a king's ransom." "Yes, you are right in what you say," replied the rich man, as he slowly looked her over. Finally, his eyes rested on hers with a gaze that seemed to penetrate into her very soul. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed her, turned to the father and said, "You have another daughter. Bring her to me." "But my friend," exclaimed the father with disappointment in his voice, "surely you are joking. I have brought before you the fairest woman in the land." But try as he would, he could not persuade the rich man to change his mind. Sadly, he walked back to his farm, realizing that his opportunity to reach a level of higher status in the village had slipped away. In short, he returned with the older daughter. With her head hanging low, she stood before the rich man. She was filled with such shame over her common appearance that she dared not look into his face. The rich man arose from his chair and slowly walked towards her. Standing before her, he took her calloused hands in his. With tenderness of the mother caressing her newborn baby, he took her face in his 2 hands and gazed into her eyes. The rich man turned to the poor farmer and said, "I will give you 10 cows for your daughter." The poor farmer was stunned, and he was filled with joy that such a man found such value in his daughter. The couple was married at once. Can you imagine what that older daughter felt? Can you imagine the value that she would have felt for the first time in her life? Now, the story doesn't stop there. The story goes a little further, and it says this: with the skill of a jeweler polishing a rough stone, the rich man worked to develop the character of his new bride. With patience, love, and understanding, he slowly peeled back the layers of low self-esteem and doubt from the girl. Sensing great love and admiration from her husband, the bride opened up to reveal the true beauty that the rich man had seen in her eyes. Years later, the couple was welcomed back to the village with great excitement. The groom was instantly recognized by a lookout, but the bride had changed so dramatically that the lookout did not recognize her at first. Instead of a shy and homely girl, she was now a beautiful and confident young woman. Her charm was so great that some remarked that the rich man had gotten a bargain by only paying 10 cows. See, I don't think Jesus just overpaid for us. I think he knew exactly what he was doing when he paid a great price. Because when we feel valued, when we know our true value, something changes in us. You can tell a kid that is valued apart from a kid that is not valued at home. And there's no amount of things you can put around that. When you don't have that value, there's nothing you can do to substitute for that value. Christ has put a huge value on us. You know, there's another show I love to watch. It's called American Pickers. Maybe you've seen it. It takes place in Iowa. And they go, woohoo, Iowa. And they go to like these farms, and it's actually a really great picture of what farms are. I mean, there's just like heaps and heaps of junk. And these two guys go, and they're just like picking apart all through all these pieces of junk. And they find these pieces that are still junk. All right, they find it. And they go and they negotiate with this farmer guy, and the farmer guy will usually sell it for a little bit. But when they're looking at this piece, it's still junk, but they see value in it. And they take this piece, they take it back to their shop, and they restore it. And then everyone else sees the value that they saw. God is the great restorer. He hasn't paid a high price for you because he wants you to continue in the condition you are. But there's nothing you can do to change that condition. He's the one that does the restoring. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says this, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, behold, the new has come." God has showed value in our lives, and he wants to restore us. Sometimes I think God likes to take the people that are the furthest away in the worst condition because he wants to show just how capable he is as a restorer. When I think about Good Friday, man, there's so many different ways God could have chosen to do things. But I don't know if there was a better way to instill value in me, to display value the way that he did for us. Just that awe in that. And if there's someone here who does not feel valued, it's not coming from God, I can tell you that. The value he has, and he's displayed for our life, is immense. I'm so thankful for that he values me in the way he does. I know the word in the verse is usually love. Love is a great word. But I really like the word value. I really like the word value.
Oh tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
I hope you take a look at the couple of verses that we looked at tonight. And I hope as you memorize them that you can look at those verses, that you can recognize your condition, but that you can also feel the value that Christ has laid on your life and the price that he paid. And then to know that that condition does not have to stay, that he will restore you, because he's the great restorer. I'm going to give us a benediction that can be found at the end of Jude, which goes like this. To him who is able to keep you from falling and to present yourself before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy, to the only God, our Savior, be glory, majesty, power, and authority through Jesus Christ our Lord, before all ages, now and forevermore. Amen. May you go in peace.